My neighborhood was governed by a Homeowners Association, an organization that wielded immense power over our daily lives. Living under their watchful eye meant adhering to a laundry list of rules that dictated everything from lawn maintenance to exterior paint colors. While the intent behind these regulations was to preserve property values and maintain aesthetic harmony, their strict enforcement felt more like tyranny than governance. From the moment I moved in, I found myself navigating a minefield of regulations. The HOA meetings were often filled with tense confrontations as members debated the latest grievances, whether someone's flower garden was an eyesore or if a tree had grown too tall. Karen, the most vocal among them, often led the charge, zealously reminding us of the consequences of our noncompliance. It wasn't unusual for her to prowl the streets, clipboard in hand, ready to document perceived violations for submission to the board. Each rule came with its own set of penalties, ranging from hefty fines to mandated renovations that could lead to considerable financial strain. Everyone seemed afraid to voice their discontent. Dissenters were silenced quickly by the threat of retaliation or social ostracization. As a newcomer, I initially felt intimidated by this atmosphere of control and fear, knowing that any deviation from the norm could land me squarely in Karen's crosshairs. However, as I became more familiar with my surroundings and began digging into those binding papers, the board that governed our community, I started noticing nuances and vague language sprinkled throughout. What seemed like unshakable power suddenly appeared riddled with potential loopholes. While the HOA aimed to enforce conformity rigidly, their rules didn't seem as airtight upon closer inspection, and that knowledge would soon change everything. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on authority. As a board member of the HOA, she took immense pride in her role, believing it was her personal mission to ensure every resident adhered to the community's rules. With her perfectly coiffed hair and sharp business attire, she embodied the archetype of an overzealous enforcer, always prepared to dispense her brand of justice with little regard for context or compassion. Her presence at HOA meetings was commanding. She would often arrive early, ready to take notes and prepare for battle against any perceived infractions. Karen had a keen eye for detail, spotting even the smallest deviations from the norm. A slightly unkempt lawn or an unauthorized decoration could send her into a frenzy. The moment someone dared to question her authority, she'd pivot from gentle reprimands to fiery tirades about maintaining property values and community standards. Neighbors whispered about her infamous inspections, during which she would don a pair of wide-brimmed sunglasses and patrol the streets like a hawk searching for prey. Armed with her clipboard and a pen that seemed to have an insatiable appetite for writing warnings, she relished in documenting violations. It became almost ritualistic. Residents would brace themselves for encounters with Karen, their hearts racing as they anticipated what new infraction they might be accused of. Despite her seemingly relentless demeanor, there was an underlying vulnerability to Karen. Behind her tough exterior lay a fear of losing control over a community that had become intertwined with her identity. This fear fueled her drive to maintain order at all costs, an aspect I couldn't help but exploit once I uncovered the loopholes hidden within the very rules she enforced with such fervor. Little did she know that my discovery would soon turn this power dynamic on its head. One evening, while sifting through the HOA's governing documents, known as the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, I stumbled upon a clause that caught my eye. It was tucked away in a section dedicated to property modifications and community aesthetics. The language was convoluted, but hinted at exceptions for certain types of alterations, specifically those that didn't significantly alter the overall appearance of the property. As I continued to read, I noted a particularly vague phrase: minor improvements may not require prior approval from the board. My heart raced at this realization. It meant that smaller changes could be made without the scrutiny of Karen and her cohorts. The implications were enormous. If interpreted correctly, it offered a pathway to bypass some of the HOA's most stringent regulations. The more I dug into this association, the more discrepancies I found. There were unclear definitions surrounding what constituted a minor improvement and what guidelines were truly enforceable versus those that had been enacted through fear and intimidation over the years. I began to envision ways I could utilize this loophole to my advantage, perhaps by adding outdoor decor or even altering landscaping features without notifying Karen. It felt exhilarating to hold this newfound power in my hands. With each passing day, the idea of challenging Karen's authority became less daunting and more like an exciting game. This was not merely about breaking rules. It was about reclaiming some autonomy in a space that had long felt oppressive. Armed with this knowledge, I began plotting my next steps, eager to see how my actions would shake up the rigid structure of our community and send shockwaves through Karen's carefully controlled world. As the initial thrill of discovering the loophole settled in, I found myself gripped by a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I felt exhilarated and empowered at the prospect of finally taking a stand against Karen and her relentless enforcement of the HOA's rules. The thought of making changes to my property without fear of reprisal was liberating. It felt like a quiet rebellion against the stifling atmosphere that had dominated our neighborhood for too long. Yet alongside this excitement, a nagging apprehension gnawed at me. What if Karen caught wind of my plans? She had a reputation for being vigilant, and once she realized I was exploiting a flaw in the regulations she held dear, there was no telling how she might retaliate. Would she escalate her inspections or rally other board members against me? The very idea sent chills down my spine. I envisioned her barging into my yard, armed with her clipboard, ready to unleash her trademark fury on what she would undoubtedly see as an egregious violation. Despite these worries, I couldn't shake off the vision of finally enjoying my home free from constant scrutiny. I pictured myself adding vibrant flower boxes and decorative lighting that would enliven my outdoor space. Minor changes that could transform the environment without attracting undue attention from the HOA. My mind raced with ideas, but beneath it all was a cautious hope. Perhaps this newfound loophole could shift the balance of power in our community. In those quiet moments, reflecting on my next steps, I realized this wasn't just about personal freedom. It was about sparking a change that could embolden others to push back against Karen's oppressive authority. I was ready to take action, and already plotting ways to outsmart her. As I pondered the implications of using the loophole, I found myself caught in a mental tug-of-war. On one side, there was a tantalizing prospect, the chance to enhance my home and finally express my personality within the constraints of the HOA. I envisioned vibrant garden beds overflowing with flowers, tasteful outdoor decor, and perhaps even a cozy fire pit for gatherings with friends. All these changes felt liberating, not only for my property, but also as a statement against the oppressive oversight of Karen and her board. However, the opposing side brought forth legitimate concerns. Karen was notorious not just for her enforcement, but for her relentless pursuit of anyone who dared to challenge her authority. I could envision her crafting elaborate retaliations, perhaps mobilizing the rest of the HOA against me or launching a campaign of intimidation to dissuade other residents from following suit. The thought of waking up to find warning letters plastered on my door sent a shiver down my spine. To weigh my options more thoughtfully, I made a list of pros and cons. The benefits were clear: increased enjoyment of my home, enhanced community spirit, and the potential to inspire others to embrace their own desires for improvement. Conversely, the risks were daunting: an avalanche of fines, social ostracization from neighbors who feared Karen's reaction, and the anxiety of constant scrutiny. After days of contemplation, I realized that inaction meant remaining a pawn in Karen's game, shackled by fear. The very essence of reclaiming my space was at stake. Ultimately, I decided that pursuing this plan was worth the risk. It was time to take action and assert myself against an unjust system. With steely resolve, I plotted out my first steps, ready to dive into this newfound freedom and seize control over my own life once and for all. With my decision made, it was time to put my plan into action. I started by carefully outlining the specific changes I wanted to implement. My first project involved transforming my bare front porch into a vibrant space filled with colorful potted plants and inviting outdoor furniture. Each item would qualify as a minor improvement that, according to the loophole I discovered, didn't require HOA approval. I created a detailed list of all the items I needed to purchase: terracotta pots, soil, a variety of flowers, and some decorative string lights to add charm, none of which would alter the exterior structure of my home significantly. The idea was to keep it simple yet impactful while remaining within the vague language of what constituted a minor improvement. Before diving headfirst into decorating, I documented my plans meticulously. I took photos of my porch's current state and sketched out how I envisioned it after the updates. This would serve as proof if any disputes arose later on. Once satisfied with my plans, I rushed out to buy the necessary materials, relishing the thrill of each new addition. I spent a weekend planting flowers and arranging furniture, transforming my porch into an oasis that beckoned both neighbors and friends. As I worked, adrenaline surged through me. This was more than just home improvement. It felt like an act of defiance against Karen's reign of terror. After completing my project, I stepped back to admire the result. My porch radiated warmth and hospitality, standing in stark contrast to Karen's rigid approach to community aesthetics. Part of me wondered how long it would take for her to notice the changes, and if she would respond with her usual fury or perhaps be powerless against my clever maneuvering. Regardless, I felt a renewed sense of pride in taking control of my property and looked forward to seeing how this new venture would unfold in the face of impending scrutiny from the HOA. It didn't take long for Karen to discover the changes I had made to my porch. Within a few short days, I noticed her prowling the neighborhood, her sharp eyes scanning for violations like a hawk hovering over its territory. When she finally caught sight of my vibrant floral display and cozy furniture, her reaction was nothing short of explosive. The following morning, I was sipping coffee on my porch when she stormed up to my house, her cheeks flushed and her posture radiating indignation. "What is this?" she exclaimed, gesturing wildly at the flowers swaying in the breeze and the decorative lights glimmering in the sunlight. "You can't just do whatever you want. This isn't allowed." Her frantic tone drew curious glances from neighbors passing by, some of whom paused to watch this showdown unfold. I remained calm but firm as she continued her tirade, insisting that my improvements were a clear violation of HOA rules. She claimed they disrupted the community's aesthetic harmony, but I could see that deep down, it was more about losing control than preserving any standards. Not one to back down easily, Karen wasted no time rallying support from other members of the HOA board. That afternoon, she organized an emergency meeting and sent out emails filled with exaggerated claims about how my so-called improvements posed a threat to property values across the neighborhood. I imagined her typing furiously as she painted me as a rebellious homeowner bent on dismantling the very fabric of our community. As I watched her fervently work to solidify opposition against me, a feeling of satisfaction surged within me. This was exactly what I had hoped for. While she twisted facts and tried to incite anger among residents who typically avoided confrontation, I knew I had opened Pandora's box. If all went according to plan, not only would my actions challenge Karen's authority, but might also empower others in our neighborhood to rethink their own complacency amid strict regulations, all while Karen's frantic attempts only served to highlight how flimsy her grip on power truly was. As news of my porch transformation spread throughout the neighborhood, the reactions among my neighbors varied widely, igniting a ripple of discussions both in support and against my actions. Some residents, initially intimidated by the HOA's strict regulations, saw my bold move as a breath of fresh air, a sign that change was not only possible, but necessary. They began to approach me with cautious enthusiasm, expressing their own frustrations about Karen's rigid enforcement and asking if I could share details about the loophole I had discovered. Conversations over backyard fences grew animated, with some neighbors signaling their desire to make minor improvements to their own homes as well. One neighbor, an artist who had long wanted to create a small mural on her garage wall, even mentioned organizing a community meeting to discuss our options for working around the rules. The prospect of solidarity invigorated me. Perhaps my actions were sparking a shift in our stagnant community spirit. Conversely, there were those who sided with Karen, echoing her concerns about maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic and property values. I noticed a few faces glancing disapprovingly at my porch as they walked by, old friends turned wary critics who murmured about disruptive changes and expressed concern over where this newfound rebellion might lead. Even some longtime HOA supporters began circulating rumors that I was trying to incite chaos within the community. Tensions mounted as more people weighed in, creating an atmosphere thick with division. Karen eagerly seized on these dissenting voices during her emergency HOA meetings, framing my actions as reckless and threatening. But beneath her authoritative rhetoric, I sensed an undercurrent of fear. She was losing her grip not only on me, but on others who quietly yearned for change. As I stood amidst this growing tension, I felt a mix of pride and apprehension. While I was grateful for newfound allies willing to challenge the status quo alongside me, the threat from Karen loomed larger than ever. What would happen next? Would this spark lead to genuine community empowerment or fuel an even stronger backlash from an increasingly desperate HOA? Only time would tell how this delicate balance would unfold in our tightly knit neighborhood. The situation began to escalate rapidly following the HOA meeting where Karen voiced her discontent. During those meetings, which were already wrought with tension, the atmosphere morphed into a battleground of ideas and emotions. Karen, looking increasingly frazzled, presented my porch transformation as evidence of a potential community crisis. At the next HOA assembly, she pushed for a vote on stricter enforcement of existing rules, proclaiming that my actions could set a dangerous precedent for future homeowners. The other board members appeared divided. Some were hesitant to support her harsh measures, while others rallied behind her, eager to quash what they regarded as rebellious behavior. As conflict brewed within the boardroom, it spilled out into the larger community. Neighbors began to confront each other at their mailboxes and on evening walks, debating not just my porch, but the fundamental tenets of HOA governance itself. I overheard conversations filtering down from heightened debates in hushed tones. Were we merely tenants in a dictatorial regime or owners of our own homes deserving of autonomy? Tensions rose to a high point during one intense exchange between Karen and a previously silent neighbor who spoke up at last. Why should we let one person dictate how we enjoy our homes? Her comments struck a chord, igniting murmurs of agreement among attendees who had felt similarly stifled. Unfortunately for them, that only fueled Karen more. She doubled down on her rhetoric about maintaining property values and neighborhood aesthetic purity. By the end of the evening, two sides had formed, those besotted with long-standing HOA rules seeking order and those eager for change, echoing demands for freedom. I remained at the center of this storm, caught between the fervent desire for expression and Karen's iron grip on conformity. The escalation culminated as both groups prepared for the next HOA meeting, now crucially framed not merely as an ordinary gathering, but as an explosive ground for a potential revolution. Would I stand strong alongside newfound allies challenging an oppressive system, or would fear creep back into our lives? Only time, and this impending confrontation, could determine our fate. The day of the pivotal HOA meeting arrived, and I could feel the weight of the tension in the air as residents filed into the community center. The room was charged with anticipation, divided between those who supported my efforts and those loyal to Karen and her stringent adherence to the rules. As I took my seat, I caught Karen's steely gaze, her expression a mix of determination and disdain. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up, gripping the edges of the podium to steady myself. With a deep breath, I addressed the room. Thank you all for being here today. I want to clarify something crucial about my recent porch changes. I glanced around, gauging the crowd's interest. I didn't just act on a whim. I discovered a loophole in our governing documents that allows for minor improvements without prior approval from the HOA. Karen leaped into action, ready to reclaim control of the narrative. This isn't about improvements. It's about maintaining the integrity of our neighborhood. Your choices could lead to chaos. We cannot allow this disregard for our rules. Her voice was laced with urgency, almost frantic. Undeterred, I continued. But it is about freedom, freedom to express ourselves within our homes. This community has long been clouded by fear of retribution, fear enforced by stringent rules that stifle our individual creativity. My porch is a simple expression of that freedom. I emphasized each word, hoping to resonate with those who quietly yearned for change. Some audience members murmured in agreement, which emboldened me further. We're at a crossroads right now. We can choose to live in fear or embrace change and diversity within our community. Let's not forget that we own our properties, not just Karen or anyone on this board. As I spoke, shifting sentiments rippled through the crowd. Neighbors began exchanging glances, some nodding in support while others looked conflicted. Karen's demeanor shifted from aggressive to slightly rattled as she absorbed my arguments and the unexpected backing from some residents. The climax had reached its peak. I was standing up not just for myself, but for everyone feeling weighed down by oppressive governance. This confrontation had ignited something deeper within our community, a call to arms against conformity and an invitation to embrace individuality. The outcome of this conflict felt more significant than any single decision. It was a challenge to redefine what our neighborhood could represent for all of us moving forward. In the aftermath of the heated confrontation at the HOA meeting, the board convened to deliberate on Karen's proposal for stricter enforcement and my defense of individual expression through minor improvements. As the discussions unfolded, it became clear that opinions were deeply divided. Some members sympathized with Karen's fears of losing control over property aesthetics, while others recognized the growing desire among residents for more autonomy and creative freedom. Ultimately, the board decided to maintain the existing regulations regarding minor improvements, but introduced a new clause aimed at fostering community dialogue. They agreed to allow homeowners to propose changes on a trial basis without immediate retribution, provided these proposals underwent community review during monthly meetings. This compromise was a small victory. It acknowledged my loophole while still preserving some of the HOA's authority. The consequences of this decision rippled through our neighborhood. Many residents felt emboldened, leading to a surge in discussions about home improvements and personal expression. For the first time in years, neighbors began sharing ideas openly, transforming our once quiet streets into vibrant spaces filled with colorful decorations and personalized touches. However, not everyone embraced this shift. Karen, feeling threatened by this newfound momentum, attempted to rally her supporters against what she deemed a slippery slope toward chaos. Yet her influence seemed diminished. Even some staunch allies began questioning whether strict adherence to rules truly fostered community spirit. As I walked through the neighborhood following these changes, I noticed an unmistakable difference in the air. A sense of camaraderie as people engaged in conversations about their homes and shared experiences beyond mere compliance with HOA regulations. I realized that while my actions had sparked a significant conflict, they also ignited a movement toward collective empowerment that breathed new life into our community's spirit. In this evolving landscape, I felt hopeful about what lay ahead, an opportunity for all of us to reclaim ownership over our homes and define what our neighborhood could truly become together. The battle was far from over, but it had transformed into a collaborative effort toward positive change rather than division. Reflecting on this entire experience, I've realized that standing up to authority is often fraught with uncertainty, but ultimately can lead to profound personal growth. Initially, I approached the HOA with trepidation, feeling dwarfed by Karen's authoritative presence and the rigid structures of rules embedded in our community. However, my willingness to explore those regulations revealed a crucial truth. Understanding the rules can empower us to navigate them effectively. This journey taught me that sometimes authority thrives on fear rather than genuine legitimacy. Karen's overzealous enforcement stemmed from her own insecurities about losing control, and by challenging her authority, I not only reclaimed my space, but also illuminated a path for others who had felt similarly stifled. It became clear that many residents shared frustrations about limited freedom when it came to their own homes. They simply needed a catalyst to voice their concerns. Community involvement emerged as a vital lesson throughout this ordeal. The new changes implemented by the HOA fostered engagement that our neighborhood hadn't experienced in years. Neighbors who once avoided confrontations were now excitedly brainstorming ideas for home improvements and discussing how best to express their individuality within our shared space. This transformation of dynamics made me realize that active participation in our community is essential for its evolution and well-being. As I look ahead, I feel hopeful for what lies before us, a community embracing creativity and diversity while still respecting some guidelines for cohesion. My actions sparked a change not just within my property lines, but across our neighborhood as a whole, encouraging others to stand up, partake in the dialogue, and demand their right to personalize their homes. In essence, this experience was not merely about one porch transformation. It was about igniting a movement toward empowerment and reclaiming ownership over our lives and spaces within the confines of a structured environment. Together, we can reshape our community into one defined by collaboration rather than conformity, finding balance between individuality and unity. As I reflect on this transformative journey, I recognize that my experience with the HOA has fundamentally shifted my perspective on community governance and the importance of active participation. Standing up to Karen and challenging the prevailing authority was not just about asserting my right to beautify my home. It was about advocating for a community where individual voices matter. This experience taught me that authority is only as strong as the collective willingness of individuals to accept it, and through our united efforts, we can redefine the norms that govern us. In future interactions with the HOA, I feel empowered to approach discussions with newfound confidence. I understand that rules should serve us, not bind us, and I aim to encourage my neighbors to continue voicing their ideas and concerns. The compromise we reached during the last meeting has opened doors for dialogue, and I intend to help foster an environment where everyone feels comfortable proposing changes that reflect their personal styles and preferences. Moreover, this experience has highlighted the significance of community solidarity. Watching neighbors rally around the idea of self-expression reminded me that we are stronger together than we are apart. I plan to advocate for regular community forums where residents can share their thoughts on improvements or changes they wish to see, creating a more inclusive atmosphere that values each person's input. Ultimately, our neighborhood has the potential to evolve into a place where creativity and individuality thrive, alongside respect for common guidelines. This journey has reshaped my understanding of community governance. It's not merely about adhering to rules, but about collaborating to create a vibrant, harmonious living space. I am excited about what lies ahead, knowing that together we can cultivate an environment that celebrates both our shared values and our unique identities. The battle against conformity may not be over, but now it feels like a shared mission, a journey toward a better version of our community for everyone involved.